Lacking any clear policies, Labour's favourite attack line to distinguish themselves from the Tories is that Boris Johnson's government act as if there's one rule for them and one rule for everyone else. On that front, Starmer was delivered new material by The Mirror. Their front page on Wednesday read, Boris Party broke COVID rules. So in that story, The Mirror revealed that there were two parties held at Downing Street late last year. They report that a party held on the 18th of December, 40 to 50 people gathered together in what one source described as a COVID nightmare. At the time of that party, London was under Tier 3 restrictions, which meant all indoor mixing was banned except when in household bubbles. So pretty clear there. There was an exception made for gatherings, quote, reasonably necessary for work, unquote. But one, parties don't sound reasonably necessary. And two, the government's own guidance was clear that they are not reasonably necessary. They do not fall into that category. In fact, this is what their guidance said on the subject of Christmas parties when we were in Tier 4. So they said, although there are exemptions for work purposes, you must not have a work Christmas lunch or party where that is a primarily social activity and is not otherwise permitted by the rules in your tier. Keir Starmer led with the rule breaker allegations at today's Prime Minister's questions.
As millions of people were locked down last year, was a Christmas party thrown in Downing Street for dozens of people on December the 18th?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the right honourable gentleman is that all guidance was followed completely during Number 10. And can I recommend to the right honourable gentleman that he does the same with his own Christmas party, which he's advertised for December the 15th, to which unaccountably he's failed to invite the deputy leader, Mr. Speaker.
Nice try, but that won't work. Mr. Speaker, the defence seems to be no rules were broken. Well, I've got the rules that were in place at the time Prime Minister of this party. They're very clear, Mr. Speaker. You must not have a work Christmas lunch or party. Does the Prime Minister really expect the country to believe that while people were banned from seeing their loved ones at Christmas last year, it was fine for him and his friends to throw a boozy party in Downing Street?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've said what I've said about Number 10 and the events of 12 months ago. But since he asked about what we're asking the country to do this year, Mr. Speaker, which I think is, frankly, a more relevant consideration. The important thing to do, Mr. Speaker, is not only to follow the guidance which we have set out, but also when it comes to dealing with the Omicron variant, to make sure that, as we've said, that you wear a mask on public transport and in shops, Mr. Speaker, and that you self-isolate if you come into contact with somebody who has Omicron, Mr. Speaker. And above all, what we're doing is strengthening our measures at the borders, but particularly, and I think this will be very valuable for everybody to hear, get your booster, Mr. Speaker. I know the right honourable gentleman is eligible for his booster. I'm not going to ask him, Mr. Speaker, since I'm forbidden to ask him questions, but I hope very much that he's had it.
Well, I can tell the Prime Minister I've had mine. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says we should concentrate on what he's asking the country to do. We're asking the country to follow the rules. Yep. Now, the Prime Minister doesn't deny there was a Downing Street Christmas party last year. He's not denied it. He says no rules were broken. Both of those things can't be true, Prime Minister. He's taking the British public for fools. And as for following the rules, Prime Minister, it might be good just to look behind you when it comes to the question of masks. As ever, one rule for them, another rule for everybody else.
You saw there Boris Johnson in his classic, fairly obnoxious style, refusing to answer any questions put to him and instead changing the subject. First to the issue of whether Angela Rayner is invited to Keir Starmer's Christmas party. I think she is, but she's not a co-host. This is a very Westminster bubble story. And then on to the current situation we face with COVID. That latter point is clearly significant. It is of more material consequence what we do this Christmas than what Boris Johnson's staffers did 12 months ago. But even if we do follow the Prime Minister's advice and focus on the present instead of the past, the government is less than impressive. Jenny Harris is famous for telling us masks don't work and that only poor countries need to bother with test and trace. She is now Chief Executive of the UK Health Security Agency, a very important job. On Tuesday, she suggested we should cancel our Christmas parties.
If we all decrease our social contacts a little bit, actually that helps to keep the variant at bay. So I think being careful, not socialising when we don't particularly need to, and particularly going and getting those booster jabs.
That advice to not socialise when we don't particularly need to was a break from what had been government messaging on Omicron. And it was that contrast that dominated Boris Johnson's press conference later that day. Watch this exchange between the BBC's Vicky Young and the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, one of your top health advisors suggested this morning that we should all minimise our socialising over Christmas. Was she right to say that? Do you agree with her? Do you think that we should be cancelling Christmas parties right now?
The answer is no. The guidance remains the same, and we're trying to take a balanced and proportionate approach. And as I explained on Saturday, when talking for the first time to everybody about Omicron, we're really dealing with two variants at the same time. We've got the measures in place to fight Delta, which we think are appropriate, and then we're bringing in some tougher measures to stop the seeding, the rapid seeding of Omicron in this country, to give us the time we need to get the boosters in and, of course, to find out more. So those measures, as you know, are the tough measures at the borders, the PCR test when you arrive, quarantine until you've got a negative result, then tougher measures on masks, and then making sure that contacts for anybody who comes into contact with an Omicron case also has to quarantine. We think that's the right balance.
That was Boris Johnson rejecting the advice of Jenny Harris and arguing that it's the current official guidance which is sufficient. That's all we should be following. The following morning, Health Secretary Sajid Javid was pushed on the same issue.
I don't think people need to change those plans. They need to, as they have done throughout this pandemic, the vast majority of British people have been responsible and cautious. They have followed guidance, and that guidance hasn't changed. But can I just say this? Dr. Jenny Harris, I work with her almost on a daily basis. She runs the UK Health Security Agency, and she is absolutely amazing in the work that she does. And we're very lucky to have someone like her advising her. But she will be the first person to agree that ministers get advice from different experts within government, including outside government, and then we make a decision taking account of all the different advice.
Yes, but it leaves us in this position because we've heard what she has said and we've heard what you've said and the Prime Minister said, and people will be wondering, what is the right thing to do?
Well, the right thing to do is to follow the existing guidance. Of course, that some of the
Which
changes...
means not listening to Jenny Harris, actually.
Well, it means following the existing guidance, but taking into account the changes that have been announced in the last few days.
Well, that was a bit of a word salad. I don't think what Sajid Javid there said was particularly useful. Following the guidance doesn't necessarily make you safe because the guidance has so much leeway in it. So what should we do? Who should we trust of those three? I've shown you Jenny Harris, Boris Johnson and Sajid Javid. Personally, I don't really like Harris's phrasing that we should only socialise if we particularly need to, because you've got to ask, what does that mean? In the strictest sense, you might not need to attend any social event. So if someone is really taking that comment seriously, don't socialise if you don't need to. They might just never go out and have a really miserable Christmas. I could probably survive the winter by only going on walks with friends like I did last year. I don't need to go to Christmas parties. I don't need to even go to the pub, but it would be pretty shit. We have vaccines now. I want to have at least a half decent time. On the other hand, I don't think Boris Johnson or Sajid Javid's statements make much sense either. They're basically saying, keep doing as you're doing because we've got this all under control. You can follow our basic advice, wear masks on the tube, wear masks in shops, but that's it. And this is obviously not true. They don't have this under control. We have around 50,000 daily cases of coronavirus and a very leaky border system, which means Omicron could quite easily get out of control. And at this point, we are quite confident it is more transmissible. We don't know if it's more severe. We are worried about whether or not it can evade vaccines and make them less effective. That's a bad thing. And their argument does not stack up. So for me, it's neither Harris, nor Johnson, nor Javid. I don't think really what any of them said was of much use whatsoever at all, which is kind of disappointing as these are the people who are communicating the public health advice at the moment. So what should they be saying? What should we be saying? What would I be saying if I was in their position? Well, I don't think it's actually that complicated. I'd say if you want to socialize this winter, that's legit. That's a reasonable desire to have. And also because of the vaccines, it is possible. But, and we have to be honest here, we need to recognize that it is going to be considerably more dangerous than usual. This Omicron variant, we still don't know that much about it. It's quite possible that if you go out over the next few weeks, you could catch it. We don't know. We don't know how widespread it is. And people should be free to make up their own minds about the risks they will take for themselves as a person. I think that's completely fine. Now that the vaccines have made this less of a, there's an immediate threat that the NHS is going to collapse. I think people can leave it up to themselves what risk they expose themselves to. What we do need to say, though, is that if you do go out to a party, test yourself before you go. Try and open the windows once you're there. And most importantly, if you are someone who is personally taking the risk of going to parties, make sure you don't then give that to someone who is making a different judgment about risk, because there are clearly many people who are very understandably, either because of just their own how much they value parties or how much they value their own health, or more importantly, more significantly, their own medical risk factors. How old are they? What underlying conditions do they have? Which means that, if there are loads of people going to parties and then just walking around without a mask on, not taking any lateral flow tests, that puts lots of people in danger. This is the messaging we should be getting, which is that there are real risks. You've got to make your own mind up, but try not to, make your actions impinge on other people as much as possible. That's not what we hear. And I was thinking today, why is that not what we hear? Because that should be pretty simple, and instead we get these word salads. And my conclusion after thinking about this is because that would require the government being honest about the situation we find ourselves in. And in a complex situation that we find ourselves in, like this one, right, it's not simple what we should be doing. What we need is a government that is honest with us about the risks that we are taking. We need to be fully informed when we make these decisions. But they are unwilling to do that, because instead of working out how do we fully inform the public so that they can make decisions according to their own priorities, they tell us whatever they think will keep us spending money. They're terrified of damaging consumer confidence. They're terrified that we will start complaining about unsafe workplaces, so they have to pretend that places are safe when they are not. And they want us to ignore that they're doing a pretty shitty job, right? You have to say, no, we've got this under control. No, it is kind of safe going to a Christmas party. It's clearly not, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to go, right? They won't be straight with us. And I'm getting frustrated about this, I have to say. People are going to have to make tough decisions over the next 2 months, and they are going to be much more tough than they need to be. And first, I think this is because the government has completely failed to bother to invest in any ventilation anywhere. We are 2 years into this pandemic. This decision about whether or not I attend a Christmas party, it would be much easier if I was confident that pubs, bars, all of these hospitality venues had invested properly in ventilation over the past 2 years. But the government, as far as I understand, has done nothing to that effect. We could have been subsidizing these buildings to improve ventilation instead of subsidizing people to have a half-price meal, which didn't really make sense last summer. Anyway, just like with schools, they've done absolutely nothing on that front, which is why this winter is going to be harder than it needed to be. The second thing I'm annoyed about is masks. And I say this not as an anti-masker. I haven't become a Piers Corbyn, you can't keep a fart in your trousers kind of guy. The reason I say this is because I think it's right that we're being told that you should wear masks in shops and on trains. But again, like with ventilation, we're 2 years into this pandemic, and it still hasn't been explained to us properly that not all masks are equal. If you wear a medical surgical mask or an N95 mask, then you are going to be keeping people around you very safe, and yourself very safe. If you wear a cloth mask, you're keeping people around you a bit safer than they otherwise would be, but not nearly as safe as if you wore a surgical mask. There's science backing this up. I'm not making this up. It was reported on CNBC very recently, a study by a group of researchers from Yale and Stanford. They found that surgical masks are 95% effective at filtering out virus particles compared to just 37% for cloth masks. And we still got the government to say, oh, just wear any old mask. Most people are just wearing a bit of cloth in front of their mouth instead of a surgical mask. And I'm not blaming anyone. I'm not blaming anyone because they're doing what they were told to do. And at the start of the pandemic, actually that made sense, because the reason we were told, make your own mask, don't use the surgical mask, is because we needed to prioritize those for people who worked in healthcare workers, because they were most at risk. But there isn't a shortage of masks anymore. So why aren't they telling us that? And if there is a shortage of masks, why aren't we investing enough money that we can just, make enough surgical masks for everyone? There should at this point be a pack of masks, high quality masks, sent to every citizen in Britain. And then maybe when we go through this whole rigmarole, this sort of COVID theatre of putting that mask on before we go to the tube, now, do that. I do that. But it's way less effective than it could be, because I think the government, their priority here is we have to be seen to be doing something. We're going to do the bare minimum. And the moment it's remotely difficult, subsidizing pubs to install ventilation or boosting the production of actually effective masks and then sending them out, the government that's beyond us, actually. That's beyond us. What we're going to do is the bare minimum that makes people feel like something is happening. And that has been their strategy throughout this whole pandemic. And that's why we're having this conversation of, are you going to avoid all Christmas parties and, have another fairly miserable year, or are you going to subject yourself to the risk of catching COVID? I find it very frustrating we're still having this conversation after 2 years.